Bagels! Get your fresh, hot, homemade bagels right here on Vital Point. What's happening, people? This is your host, Andrew Penzi. We are in the kitchen again. We must be going stir crazy here with this coronavirus because we are just cooking up a storm. And today we are making some fresh, homemade bagels. How about that? Can't beat a good fresh bagel. A friend of mine made these recently and got me all psyched up for it. I am combining a couple different recipes here, and let's run through the ingredients. Starting off the roster, I have 6½ cups of all-purpose flour. Ideally, you would use bread flour because the high gluten in bread flour gives bagels that nice chewiness that everyone wants. But we don't have bread flour, and it's kind of hard to find in the stores right now. So I'm going with all-purpose, and we'll let you know how it turns out. Tablespoon of yeast. The next one's a bit of an odd ingredient. Diastatic malt powder, 2 tablespoons. This is an interesting one. I had to order this online. I got it from Barry Farm Enterprises online. Again, a little bit hard to find. But on Amazon, it's pretty pricey, so you're better off going elsewhere, I think. And essentially what this is are barley seeds that they allow to germinate. And then after they have germinated, they dry them out again, grind them down into flour, and that germination adds all these enzymes into the mix. So there are like live active enzymes in here. And the enzymes and the yeast are buddies. So they get together and they have like some super rising power. So the diastatic, there's 2 different types. There's diastatic, which is active enzymes are in there. And then there's also a non-diastatic powder, which is that they've been heated to a point that the enzymes are killed. So the non-diastatic malt powder just adds some flavor, color, and texture, whereas the diastatic malt powder adds, that's a tongue twister, adds the flavor, color, texture, but also the extra rising power. Number 3 on the list is some barley malt syrup. This comes in these little containers. It is essentially, to me, it's like a cross between molasses and corn syrup. Super thick, not quite as dark as molasses. It's like, you know, maybe halfway there, but it has that sort of molassesy, malty richness to it, and it adds a lot of color, again, flavor to the bagels, and it's going to be really interesting to put this in there. A little bit of sweetness as well. Last but not least, we have just over a tablespoon of kosher salt. First thing we have to do is activate the yeast and get the yeast alive and moving. And essentially, as the yeast grow, they sort of let out little farts, and those farts are what's going to rise the bread. So it's kind of a gross way of thinking about it, but it's kind of funny too. So we're starting off with 3 cups of water. I have this water at about 110 degrees. If you do it too much warmer than that, you can actually cook the yeast and kill it. And you don't want to kill it. Yeast is a living thing. Too much cooler than that, and it's just going to take too long to start growing. So we're going to dump our yeast into the 3 cups of water. And I'm also going to add in a little sugar for the yeast to start growing. And I have my barley malt syrup that I'm also going to add in and mix it all together. This stuff is thick. Woo! It's almost like caramel. Give it a good mix. And then we're going to let this sit on the counter for 5 or 10 minutes and get nice and frothy. I hear that in a pinch. If you don't have the malt syrup, you could actually get away with just maybe a little bit of molasses or some sugar, but it's not going to be quite the same or quite as authentic. Also, if you really wanted, you could probably do away with the diastatic malt powder and just try it with the bread flour, but again, it's not going to be quite the same. It really won't be a real New York bagel. Now, for mixing this all together, I am a huge fan of the KitchenAid stand mixer. It'll make your life so much easier. If you don't have one of these, you could do it the old-fashioned way with a whole lot of elbow grease. But this is going to be a really stiff dough, and just again, the kneading attachment on here will make your life much easier. We're going to start off with the paddle wheel just to get all the loose ingredients incorporated, and once it gets thick enough, we'll switch over to the dough hook. Our yeast has gotten nice and frothy. You see that big head of froth on the top, like a nice beer. So that means it's ready to go. First things first, I'm going to add the yeast into here with the paddle attachment, and I'm going to add the first 2 cups of flour and just get a slurry going in the bowl. I'm also going to add into that the salt and the diastatic malt powder. Now I'm just going to keep adding a cup of flour at a time until it starts to thicken up. Starting to get a little too thick for the paddle attachment, so I'm going to switch it out to the dough hook now. Playing with dough is actually a pretty fun thing. When you grab it with your fingers, it should be soft, but not necessarily sticking to your fingers. And depending on what you're making, each recipe is a little different. But for bagels, you want it to be a semi-dry dough, kind of stiff, to be able to hold up, because you want like a good chewy bagel. So even though I said 6½ cups flour, I can tell right away I'm going to need some more flour in this recipe, at least probably another ½ cup. I'm just going to keep adding a little at a time until I feel like the texture is just right. You can see how the sides of the bowl are pretty clean now. The dough pulled itself off the sides. Slightly sticky, but it's not sticking to my fingers at all. This dough is ready to roll. And I like rubbing the bowl and the dough with some melted butter that I have here, just a tablespoon or so of melted butter. And that just helps the outside stay nice and elastic, so that when it rises, it just lets it rise a little bit easier. After I rub the butter in here, I'm going to transfer the dough back into the larger bowl to let it rise. You definitely don't want the dough to dry out while it's rising. Now if you're a Christian, you go ahead and you just cut a little cross in the dough. Of course, we could all use a little of God's help. We're going to cover this up with some plastic wrap and find a nice warm spot for it to rise. Now I have a few secrets for rising dough. Sometimes I will preheat the oven at like 200 degrees, get it a little bit warm. I'm going to shut the oven back off, put down a damp towel, and just let the warmth of the oven kind of do its magic to let this rise. You put the warm towel down so that the bottom doesn't actually get too hot on the grates of the oven. Another trick that I've been using a lot lately that I really like is to heat up the dryer and put, again, a damp towel in the dryer, let that go for a while till it gets nice and hot. Put the bowl right in there on top of the damp towel. The dampness of the towel helps hold that heat in there for a while, and it does a great job of rising bread. See you in about an hour or so. Everything I've read said that after the bagels rise for an hour or two, that you're supposed to put the dough in the fridge overnight, ideally, for the ultimate best texture. That ain't gonna happen. So we're just gonna go ahead and make the quicker version, let it rise for an hour, hour and a half, however long it takes to like double in size, and then we're gonna start rolling them up into some bagels. If I have stirred up your appetites, please leave me a comment below and tell me what toppings you like on your bagels. All right, the dough rose really nicely here, definitely more than doubled in size.
Well, that looks so satisfying.
Very satisfying, folks.
I just want to squish it.
All right, I'm gonna cut this into 4s. I think I'm gonna cut this into like 3 balls each, 3 sections. I don't know if that's too big. Make a little ball out of it. And then each ball is going to become a bagel. This piece is a little bigger. I'm going to cut it into 4s. Again, just roll it into balls. We're going to let it sit for about 20 minutes or so to rise about 20 minutes longer. And then we're going to boil them. I got all the bagels divvied up and lined up into balls covered with plastic wrap. We're going to let it sit for 20 minutes. I got a pot full of boiling water here. Woo, that is hot. We're going to add a tablespoon of kosher salt, tablespoon of baking soda, and we're going to add about a 1/4 cup of this barley malt syrup. That's about a 1/4 cup. The dough really rose great. I'm real happy with it. The technique is to get a little flour on your hands, a little flour on the table here, counter. Get a piece of dough and punch a hole through it with your thumb, and then just roll it out a little bit. You know, I don't even have to roll it. I could just kind of shape it just like that. And we're going to drop it into this boiling water for about a minute on each side. I could really smell that malt syrup now. After a minute on each side, take them out of the boiling water and put them on a slotted tray to drain. Once the bagels have dried sufficiently, just brush them with a little bit of egg wash. And coat them with your favorite seasoning. I have some everything seasoning here, sesame seeds, poppy seeds, whatever floats your boat. Give them a flip and do the same to the other side. These guys are about ready to go in the oven. About 15 minutes at 500 degrees and these puppies are looking done. Beautiful, they came out nice. All right, fresh bagels, hot from the oven. Summer, you gotta tell us how they are. They feel pretty good, look pretty good. All right, let's go. Don't burn yourself.
Oh my goodness.
Does it taste like an authentic bagel? I mean, you could be honest now.
Better.
Better, all right.
This tastes heavenly. Oh my goodness. It's
Wow.
so good.
Well, you can't beat fresh baked bread, and fresh baked bagel even better. All right, guys, you heard her. Fresh baked bagels are where it's at. Hope you are well, and I'll catch you guys next time right here on Vital Point.